Adriana, are you pumped to talk about the First Amendment?
Yeah!
What is the First Amendment?
The freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of speech,
Freedom to assemble!
and to petition the government.
The First Amendment of the Constitution makes certain guarantees of religious freedom. The right to practice whatever religion one chooses, but there are two clauses. The Establishment Clause is the government cannot establish any official religion, and then the Free Exercise Clause, which means the government cannot prohibit citizens from exercising their own personal religious beliefs. But there has been a lot of controversy about how to interpret those two clauses. Not everyone has agreed with the court's interpretation of these two short phrases, and as many of the cases involving religious rights touch on vital issues such as marriage, education, and the right to die, recent disputes over the court's interpretations have often been really bad. It's unlikely that this will change in the near future. In recent years, new political initiatives and new confrontations between science and religion have raised new challenges for the court. In other words, the Supreme Court really doesn't have it all settled yet. Checkmate. One thing that people do need to realize, though, and that's not always a given, is the First Amendment placed restrictions only on the federal government. State governments remained free to establish churches, collect taxes, and regulate religious practices as much as they had in the past. One of the biggest issues is freedom of religion in public schools. A lot of times they think that it's completely just you couldn't have any kind of religion, but it does say that as long as there is no disruption of normal school activity, individual students are free to engage in prayer whenever and wherever they like. Religious clubs that are initiated and led by students may have as much access to school facilities as do all other student clubs. Students even have the right, within limits, to distribute religious material on school grounds. I win.
So Becca, tell me about the freedom of speech.
The founders believed that it was important for a representative democracy, and so they put it in the First Amendment to protect it. And Benjamin Franklin said that if one desired to overthrow a nation's freedom, then they should suppress the freedom of speech. Without the freedom of speech, the framers believed that change, revolution, and tyranny would arise. And so basically they protected the freedom of speech because they realized the fact that the freedom of speech would lead to other freedoms, and that without it, the minority's opinion would be suppressed and the majority's opinion would dominate. And an example of this is a college student claims that his right to the freedom of speech was suppressed because the college made him remove a Confederate flag from his dorm room window, but then they later implemented, and he claims it's part of his heritage, while they were claiming it was racist.
What's the definition of freedom of press?
The right to circulate opinions in print without censorship by the government. It is described the general right of every person to have access to and make use of literally a press so as to publish to the world at large without intervention of licensors or censors. The ability to physically mass publish materials was the key means by which wider circulation could be gained for a contribution on a matter of the general importance.
And can you give me an example of that?
Former U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales threatened the press for reporting information about the war on terror that the government deemed classified. Gonzales insisted that the government had the authority to prosecute and thus intimidate journalists who published alleged classified information, implying that the freedom of the press was not quite as free as Americans previously have thought. When asked whether he was open to the possibility of the New York Times should be prosecuted for its disclosures in December 2005 concerning a national security agency surveillance program, Gonzales said his department was trying to determine the appropriate course of action in that particular case. Battles are continually being fought across America to protect our First Amendment rights. However, Americans should not be silenced by the government for lawfully exercising their First Amendment freedoms.
The First Amendment guarantees to all Americans the right peaceably to assemble. This means that if people want to gather peacefully to speak, discuss, protest, or for any reason, and they are not hurting anybody, the government isn't allowed to do anything to stop them. However, they aren't allowed to just gather whenever or wherever they want, because they have to respect other people's rights as well. For instance, they're not allowed to gather together violently, because that violates other people's rights not to be attacked. They're not allowed to make a loud gathering in the middle of a neighborhood in the middle of the night. This prevents their peaceful use of their private property, and it is an unpermitted and unnecessary violation of their well-being. Protesters should gather in the day, when their noise would be less harmful. Protesters are also not allowed to block public facilities, such as roads or sidewalks, because the taxpayers paid to build those, and they have a right to be able to use them.
Petitioning the government for a redress of grievances means telling them about a wrong they have committed and asking them to make it right. This is important because it gives people a way to have the government improve their behavior without having to resort to violent revolution.
That's
all, folks.